So one of the servants that I feel like gets watered down due to his lack of interactions is the Greek behemoth himself, Heracles. But today we wait no longer. In his past, Heracles was born out of the bonds between the sky god Zeus and one of his mistresses, Alcmene. Alcmene is also known for being the granddaughter of the hero Perseus. Now, if you're familiar with pretty much anything that Zeus gets involved in, I'm sure you can already imagine how this is about to go down. During his childhood, Heracles was fated to be faced with an innumerable amount of challenges from the time that he was born. Why is this the case? Well, majority of that credit can be given to the fact that he was born out of wedlock. Zeus already had a wife, which was known to be Hera. And anytime that Zeus got caught out here slanging that deity supreme, Hera would make it her business to ruin the lives of anybody that happened to be involved. Side by side, Heracles was birthed along with his mortal twin brother, Iphicles. And before he could even take his first steps, Hera planted a two-headed snake in the cradle with him and his sibling. Alpheus, being the mortal child that he is, was pushed into shock and did the most natural thing from seeing the snake, which was burst into tears. Heracles, on the other hand, made it very apparent from the beginning that he was built different. When he saw the snake, he reached out and grabbed the creature by its throat and choked the shit out of it. As a matter of fact, even before the time that he was born, Hera was working in cahoots with the goddess of childbirth to block his birth and made Zeus unknowingly take an oath that would lead to Heracles becoming a servant. His entire existence made Alcmene terrified of how far Hera was willing to go, and thus she left Heracles abandoned in the middle of a forest. It was here where the child was found by the goddess Athena and ensured that he received the proper guidance. Now, another thing that Hera was known for was being the queen of goddesses in Greek culture. And along with having this title came great power. After Athena came across Heracles in the forest, he was ironically taken back to Hera to be nursed for a short amount of time. The thing about this is, Hera had no idea what Heracles looked like, so she nursed the child anyway, and when she did, she ingrained him with her divine milk. Since Heracles was more on the aggressive side, that process caused Hera a lot of pain, which made her push the child away, and the remaining milk from her feeding was shot off into the world and created the Milky Way. His original name was Alcides, but he gained the moniker Heracles from being nursed by the powers of Hera. Following this up, Athena brought Heracles back to his mother, where she would be raising him alongside his stepfather, Amphitryon. Hey, remember me? You know, the one that you abandoned? You selfish wench. Now, during his upbringing, there were a lot of times that the family noticed that the boy was unfit to be around others due to his rage. One example that quickly comes to mind is when Heracles is having one of his sessions with his musical instructor. When the tutor tried to tell Heracles that he was playing the lyre in the wrong way, he raised the lyre as high as he could, smacked the teacher across the head, and killed him. At this point, Heracles' stepfather is like, okay, we gotta get this dude out of here. He is a danger to everybody. So once again, Heracles was boxed out from society and left out in the mountains where he would be tending to his father's cattle. His stepfather would still watch over him, but he was convinced that he had to do this from afar. Regardless of all the setbacks that he turned out going through, Heracles still became a man of many arts. His stepfather taught him how to drive the chariot, the servant Castor taught him about the styles of fencing, and on the side he learned riding, boxing, wrestling, and archery. By the time that he was 18, he came face to face with a monster that often terrorized the herds in his father's domain. For 50 days straight, he hunted this creature down because he knew that it would bring his father great favor. He even managed to skin the hide from the beast and walked around flexing the same skin of the creature that nobody else was able to get rid of. Highly impressed by the warrior's triumph, you have Thespius, who sent all of his daughters to have children with Heracles and bring forth some notable heirs. And so he did. Heracles had intercourse with all 50 of this man's daughters and had a child with each and every one of them. This man was barely 18 running the meat factory. After this was out the way, you have the situation with King Erginus, who sent out several people to find the Thebans and collect the yearly tributes of 100 cattle. Now, prior to Heracles, nobody else really had a response to the king, so they just gave up the tribute accordingly. But again, Heracles is not from this earth. When they came to collect the tribute this time around, he cut the ears and the noses off of the messengers, tied it around their necks, and told them to kiss his ass. Now you go tell your king about that. The king was so furious that he built up an army strictly to take down Heracles and was killed by the hero before he can even get it off the ground. Turns out, his men were more afraid of Heracles than they were of him. They would rather pay double the tribute to Heracles than ever have to deal with him again. Following this, Heracles would then be struck by one of the greatest conflicts of his life. He was blessed by the king of Creon, who opted for him to settle down with his daughter. The two of them had several children, and for a time that brought him great peace. But Hera's tampering did not concede. She imposes her wickedness on Heracles and used her power to send him into madness. During that time, he unwillingly took the life of his own wife and their children, and there was nothing that he could do about it. Even though he was well aware that it wasn't his fault, he could no longer live with himself and even considered taking his own life to justify his actions. Thankfully, his cousin Theseus told him, "That's the coward's way out. You gotta find a way to atone for your sins." So he goes out on a visit to King Eurystheus, who comes up with a plan of obstacles that would redeem him from the damage he had done. This same process would come to be known as his 12 labors. The first labor was the Nemean lion, who ravaged the lands of Nemea constantly due to having its impregnable fur. When the time was finally right, he waited outside the entrance of the lion's cave and strangled the creature with his bare hands. The second labor happened to be the Lernaean Hydra, a creature that had 9 heads that would continue to grow regardless of if they got cut off or not. He covered his face with a cloth to protect himself from the Hydra's gases, and with the help of his nephew, cut off the Hydra's heads and kept the new ones from growing back by piercing its open neck with fire. He soon finishes off the head that was said to be immortal by using a golden sword that was given to him by Athena. The third labor was the Cerberus hind, a sacred deer that belonged to the goddess servant Artemis. The thing about this deer was that it had impeccable speed, which led Heracles into chasing it down for a year before he was finally able to pull off its capture. The fourth labor was the Aramanthian Boar. Prior to taking on this task, Heracles had lunch with one of his friends, Pholus, who was a centaur. So the two of them were just kicking it, having some wine, and this happened to attract the other centaurs, who pulled up, drunk the wine, and started to go into a fury of attacks because of it. For Heracles, the most practical way of defending himself at the time was using his bow. The downside to this is that after beating the Hydra, he dipped his arrows in the Hydra's blood, which led them to becoming poisonous. So when he shot these arrows in defense against the centaurs, he missed his mark and accidentally pierced the servant Chiron. Long story short, Chiron had to give up his immortality in a self-destructive way, and Heracles ended up saving him since he was the one that hit him in the first place. After he saved Chiron, the centaur gave the advice that he should trap the boar in the snow, making it difficult for him to move around. The fifth labor involved Heracles cleaning out the stables of King Augeas for a day. Sounds like an easy job, right? The fecal matter that he would find in these stables were poisonous. So although the task was just a simple matter, just being involved with the process of cleaning was still life-threatening work. The 6th task that he was given was to kill the man-eating Stymphalian birds. Now from the start, the nests of these creatures were surrounded by marsh. So with the help of the god of blacksmith, he was given a tool that was able to scare them out of their nests and shoot them down. The 7th labor that he had to take on was capturing the Cretan bull. This was probably his easiest task, as he was able to capture the bull with his bare hands and carried it back on his shoulders to the king with no problems. His 8th labor involved him stealing 4 man-eating horses that belonged to the giant Diomedes. Now there's many different ways that this labor plays out, but ultimately the conclusion that Heracles came to was that he had to kill the giant and feed him to the horses in order to keep them calm. Since the horses were man-eating, once he fed them the giant, it gave him enough control to bring them back to the king. The 9th labor was to obtain the girdle of Hippolyta, who was also the queen of the Amazons. The only thing about this is that Hera still wanted Heracles out of the picture, so she warned Hippolyta that he was on his way. The moment that him and his men arrived, they were forced into an all-out battle where Heracles' side still emerged victorious. The 10th labor was to steal the cattle of the 3-bodied, 3-headed giant Geryon. In order for him to get where the giant was located, Heracles had to travel by foot through the Libyan desert. The sun god Helios was so impressed by his perseverance that he gave him a blessing that allowed him to travel to the region by sea. Once he arrived to his destination, Geryon, his dog, and his herdsmen all tried to attack Heracles, and each time this ended with their demise. He takes the cattle back to the king as promised. Now I do want to bring up the fact that this was supposed to be the end of his labors, but the king said, well, the 2nd and 5th one kinda doesn't count since technically you had help. So I gotta give you 2 more. You've got to be kidding me. The 11th labor was the golden apples that belonged to Zeus. And it's only natural that these apples happen to be guarded by a dragon with 100 heads. On top of that, they were also guarded by the daughters of the Titan Atlas. Now Heracles had no idea how to get to this location, so his journey led him on several different paths, one of those being him saving Prometheus from Zeus's punishment. The grace of him saving Prometheus was that he knew the secret on how to get the apples. Look, my guy, you gotta tell the Titan Atlas to do that job for you. He was so tired of holding the world on his shoulders that he was willing to let Heracles take his place while he goes out and gets the apples for him. The whole labor is ironic since Heracles still had some help, but I think he was able to slide this time around since, for the most part, this would have been practically impossible. Now the 12th and final labor was to capture the 3-headed mythical dog Cerberus that guarded the underworld. He's also known to be the hound of the underworld god Hades. Hades was also down for the labor, but the catch was Heracles was not allowed to use a weapon. Even though he took a hard bite from the hound's serpent tail, he was able to strangle him long enough to knock him unconscious and drag him back to the king. And to throw in a little bonus, he even saved his cousin Theseus, who by that time had been trapped in the underworld for quite a while. Once he had his labors out of the way, he traveled over to Calydon and married the princess Deianira. Circumstances led to a situation where the centaur Nessus tried to take advantage of his wife, and he took his life with no remorse in return. While he was passing away, the centaur secretly told his wife that his blood was special and that it would give her complete control over Heracles whenever he lost interest. The bad thing about this is that when Heracles killed him, he used his arrow, so this blood was also tainted with the blood of the Hydra. The moment that his wife thought that Heracles found a woman that was more interesting, she tried to get back at him by soaking his shirt in the blood of the centaur. This shirt was actually meant to be worn at a feast. Heracles was left ripping the shirt off in agony on the day of this arrangement. It was too late. The hero had already taken in too much of the poison, and he goes on to perish from his wife's jealous behavior. With that in mind, the hero was still brought up to Mount Olympus by Zeus, and he is known to be the greatest hero in Greek myth because of all of his deeds. If you guys haven't already, be sure to follow me on Twitch. The link will be in the description. I'm streaming FGO and several other games all the time.